Hello, everybody. We're going to get started right on time. Thanks for joining us for the ArcGIS Maps SDK for JavaScript What's New session. My name is Julie Powell, and I'm product manager for the SDK. I also look after CalSite and the open source libraries that we support. And I'm here with Arno Fiba, who is a developer evangelist based out of Zurich. Is there anything you want to say about yourself?
Zurich, we generally work on the 3D capabilities of the Maps SDK, and I'll be talking a little bit about those as well.
Cool. And if anybody is joining online, we're still kind of getting set up for the live stream questions, but hopefully we're getting closer over here. All right, let's get started. So I wanted to kick off the session with components. If you haven't, has anybody not heard any talk about components yet? Nobody. So we've done our job. We've been talking about components quite a bit. And so I always like to show this slide because, you know what, this is a pretty complex thing going on here. It's doing shadow analysis in 3D. It's got a base map gallery. It's doing quite a bit. And all the code you need for this application is on the right-hand side. Well, of course, you need import statements and things like that. But the basic code is just that HTML you see there. So basically, components are allowing us to really simplify web development by encapsulating this custom functionality inside these HTML tags. So just a quick summary of the benefits of working with components. Really, the bottom line is that they streamline web development for front-end web development. So, sorry, they streamline your productivity, really making it easy to integrate with frameworks. It's a standard way to develop. Like if you know how to add any sort of HTML element to your page, you can just as easily add a map or a search component to your page. It's a familiar developer pattern with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The other benefit is because Esri is doing our own internal app development, ArcGIS Online, Instant Apps, Map Viewer and Scene Viewer, and other aspects throughout ArcGIS. We're developing components internally, and you'll start seeing a lot of consistency more and more consistency across apps because they're sharing code using these components. Well, in addition to that consistent user experience, we're also able to start releasing some of these as part of the JavaScript Maps SDK so that you can bring in some of these higher level ArcGIS experiences into your own applications. So there's quite a bit of really great benefits to using components. The most basic look is what I have there, just has a map and it's referencing an item ID. I wanted to just do a quick demo of the SDK site. Actually, I didn't introduce Ann Fitz, who's here with me. She's here moderating the session. She does lots of really amazing work and is one of the people that I've worked really closely with all the work she's done in the SDK to start moving our samples and tutorials over to the component-based approach. Just to show you some of the resources to be aware of, we have the Getting Started is all referencing component implementations, whether using CDN, NPM, or React, Angular. We have it documented here. There's programming patterns. I highly recommend if you're new to components, you want to understand how the map components work. It's a really great doc explaining the key aspects, the core aspects of working with components. And then, of course, some of the samples, as I mentioned, are starting to move over. And then I wanted to show the references. Notice that you still have the core JavaScript API, of course, documented here. And then you have the available components. So I'm going to go in and look at map components. Does anyone have any particular component they want to look at? Any requests? Base map gallery? Okay. Let's look at base map gallery. What's nice is within our last release, we used to have a separate storybook where we documented the components. Now that whole experience is embedded in the SDK site. So you can see here kind of a live preview of what the component looks like. Pardon my screen. And what you can do is configure it. So say, for example, I want the position to be top left or other, whatever properties each component exposes, you can set them, and then you can see the code it would take to add that to your map. Zoom in.
Yeah.
Add the, maybe, hopefully you guys, can you guys see that in the back okay? Okay. To add that code into your application. One place, and of course that documents the properties and methods and everything on these pages as well. So if you've never used components, a great place to start is the tutorials. For example, I can just display a web map, go here to view it in a code pen, and look at it here, and then you can start playing around with adding different components to the map. So here, this example has the zoom added here, and it has a legend. I can add something like ArcGIS search. Oh, this doesn't have search. ArcGIS search. And because I didn't specify the location, the default is the top right, but I could say like position equals top left, and then it'll position it where I've placed it. So yeah, you can play around with different, the component API doc, and then this is a sample you could play around with. Yeah, so have a look at the components in the SDK site. One of the components that I'm really excited about, some of the updates, is the feature table. Man, you look at this list, and over the last year, the feature table, I'd say out of all of our components, has really had the most or incredible improvements. So from a performance perspective, we've always had the lazy loading of rows for features. You're loading a lot of features, but you also have lazy loading of columns. So if you have like a million fields that you want to display inside the feature table, you don't want that to hang up your UI. And so as you kind of scroll over, you'll see that it's lazy loading the columns as well. So it really is highly optimized for working with very large data sets, whether there's a lot of rows or a lot of columns. You also have built-in related record support. So the demo's about to just go into that. The way you enable related records is with a simple Boolean saying that you want related records, show them to true. If they're editable related records, you can even directly edit them in the feature table. There's a map table interaction, so there's a concept of selection within the table, and then it'll show it on the map. We have some nice samples demonstrating that. And then notice in the demo that's getting a little ahead of me, there's a concept of custom columns, and that's probably my favorite new capability that was added to feature table. So this is actually an embedded elevation profile. So you can actually put any component you want inside a cell of the feature table. Or you could take create a calculated value that wasn't already in your data. Or you could take something that is in your data and format it a different way, like add units or do something with it. So really, the feature table is your oyster with adding, however you want to format the columns. It's also responsive, and it has attachment support. So yeah, feature table is looking really amazing. One thing, if you look right here, I actually got yelled at. Jeremy's like, Julie, come on, you can't show object ID in a demo. Like, no one wants to look at object IDs in an application. And so what you can easily do to fix that is you can actually configure the fields you want to display in your code or in Map Viewer. So basically, you go in a map viewer, you go on the layer you're interested in, show the table, and then you can do full configuration of what columns you want to display, what order you want the columns, remove some of the columns. You can do sort order of the rows. You save your web map or save the layer, and then that just automatically is respected in your application that's loading it. So it's pretty sweet. Some improvements to the directions widget. These are some very highly requested features. Excuse me. you now have the ability to drag route stops. Maybe I'll just start the video over again. You can drag route stops. So you can basically recalculate based on the route that you've moved. You can set barriers or edit barriers. And you also have access to optimizing the route based on the stops. This is not, I want to be clear that this is not waypoint dragging. So that's something that's also being requested and that we're still working on. So you can drag the stops, but these individual little blue things you see here, those are waypoints. We're eventually going to add support to be able to drag those as well. But today it's route stops. We also updated the component UI. So basically our components, they all reflect calcite design, but they don't all internally use calcite components. It just has to do with when different pieces of calcite was ready and when the widgets were initially implemented. Little by little, we're moving all of the components over to be pure calcite component based. And the benefit of that, number one, you have responsiveness is easier for us to implement. You have accessibility, like that is a huge requirement for many, many customers. It's something that we do external audits for the JavaScript SDK and calcite. So all those just kind of come along with it. And also, you also can apply this like a custom style. So when all of the components use calcite, basically you can say, okay, these are my brand colors. I want it to look like my own brand, specify the fonts you want. And all of that just gets trickled through the application and is applied everywhere because they're all based on calcite components. So that's something that you'll see more and more components that are fully calcite based. There'll be a lot of work on that throughout this year, and we hope to be complete by the beginning of next year. Directions was one of the more recent ones that moved over to calcite components. This is another example. So the search component, just this release 432, it just moved over to calcite. I can't tell you how many demos I've built that I love styling stuff, but then it didn't automatically get applied to the search component. Now, if you look at the right-hand side, that's 432, and so you see all of your calcite styles just applied to the components. So you can see the difference it makes when you can easily apply styles across components. All right, visualization. So let's look at some of these updates. Actually, we have an expert in this area here, Anne. She made these maps for me. One of the areas is gradient fill and stroke. This is one of the most requested features, or most used features, or way of symbology that people publish out of Pro that we didn't yet support. So if you can guess Anne's favorite place to visit, she made this. She loves Lake Tahoe. If you see a Lake Tahoe sample in SDK, you know that Anne made it. You're totally busted now. I know. So you have gradient fill and stroke. Down here, you guys might be thinking like, oh, Julie's faking. This Firefly symbology has been available for a long time. Well, previously, Firefly is just an image, basically, with that gradient look. Now this can be completely vector-based using this new symbology. And then animation. So if you want to draw attention to features, if you look closely, this is animating here in these fire hotspots. So you can draw attention to features if you'd like, or you can do it based on user interaction. So is this a video? Oh yeah, there's a video. So as you hover over icon, it's doing the little pulsating animation. The good news is that you can do that today in Map Viewer. This is part of the February update, and made this nice little demo for me where she's showing like basically setting up the symbol and then defining the animation between randomize or manual offset. So basically you can configure the way you want a symbol to animate, save that to your layer or your web map, and then that just gets applied when you use it in your application. So for clustering and binning, so if you're using feature reduction for dense data sets, we've had clustering and binning for quite some time. The update is that now we support lines and polygons in addition to points, which we already had. There's many examples when that's needed. So this particular example is looking at, I think they're building footprints. And, certain scales, it really doesn't mean anything to someone looking at the map. So it's really great to use aggregation. And then as you zoom in, you can specify when you want the actual, feature geometry to be displayed. And you can, actually, this is just in code right now, isn't it? It's not in Map Viewer yet for lines and polygons?
Yeah, I think it's just code.
Okay, yeah, just code. Coming soon in Map Viewer. So track rendering, this is another great visualization update. I love our real-time stuff you can do with the SDK using the stream layer. And many customers, I often present the real-time visualization session, and this was the one thing that I couldn't do in that session, is show tracks. So this is something we could do in 3x, is basically showing the tracks. But like many features, as we move something from 3x to 4x, we make it way better and add more functionality. So in the 4x implementation of track rendering, which was just released in 4.32 in beta, is that you can apply it not just to stream layers, but also to feature layers. And this shows basically the idea for, if you're not familiar with track rendering, it's showing multiple observations of one entity and where it's been. So you can kind of see the track of where it's been. But now you can also have labels. So see, this has I think these are speeds of these buses, having labels. It also supports animations. You can drive all of this using arcade logic and visual variables. So for example, if you want to show okay, what's the speed of the bus? Or is it over the speed limit? Is it speeding? You can actually visualize that in the track. So really any sort of visualization technique you're already used to with styling in other situations, you can apply to the track observations. Has anybody heard of display filters? Really curious about that. Okay, we got a few guys. I had to learn this. I didn't know what display filters were until we made it available. So this is something that's been available in Pro. Display filter sweet spot is when you're wanting to filter data of a really large or dense data set. So you might be thinking okay, there's other types of filtering. You've got definition expression. You have filtering on the layer, or you have filtering on the layer view, which is the client-side filter. So all these different filtering, what's display filters? What's the special thing about that? Well, display filters are specific to the display. So it's unlike definition expression, that just kind of cuts out data that doesn't meet your criteria. You can't query it, you can't access it from any of your UI components. It's just not part of your map. In the case of display filters, it's really just controlling what's being displayed. But if you look at the second bullet, it does factor into feature tile requests. So say you have a really dense data set and you have a display filter that's defined on that service. In the case where it's dense, it'll actually apply that filter in the request. Say okay, well, we don't need to display that other data anyway. The API just does it under the hood. It uses the smarts to apply the filter on the data. So in that case, it does affect the request, so what's being pulled down to the client. They're also defined and published in Pro. Eventually, you'll have a web experience for it. So what's nice about that is someone that's publishing the map can just say, these are the different filters that make sense for the data. For the application developer, you just consume the web map and it just works. The display filter is part of the map. You can use either an attribute to drive the filters or do it scale-driven. So this is an example of scale-driven display filters of streams. So at this scale, you don't need necessarily to display all the tiny little streams at that level. If you're zooming in, then you would want to display it. So what display filters does for you is rather than having to define multiple layers with different definition expressions to basically achieve what you're looking at, it's a single layer, and you define this display filters of what you want displayed at each scale. So it is a really nice feature to have. Another visualization technique well, I guess it goes beyond visualization, is Arcade now has access to time information from the map. So that means that basically you can write Arcade expressions that are based on the map's time extent for visualization, for driving labels, or what you're displaying in pop-ups. And I have a really great example of that, and I'm trying to remember what oh, this is okay, let me just show you the demo, actually. So Christian made this demo, and this is a national park visitation. If you're thinking that we're obsessed with national parks and hiking and stuff, I think you're probably right. We all really like that, and that's why we build so much demos like this. But this is really cool because you can look at over time, like which parks, there was a huge increase in visitation or decrease. Like if you look at like 2020 COVID time, look at that, look, the red arrow showing like a decrease in visualization, and times of great increase. So here, basically what's happening in the time slider, you have this time extent. And on the fly, Arcade is calculating the difference in visitation between the end of the time extent and the beginning to the end of the time extent, and it automatically applies it to the render. So it handles all of the logic involved with driving the render based on that time extent. It's also applying it to labels. So you can actually see here, Yellowstone increased by 616,992,000 people, the difference in that time frame. And as I move it, it's dynamically updating it like lightning fast. You could also apply that to pop-up. Now, what you might be wondering is, well, could I do this before? Answer is yes. You could have made this exact app before, but you would have written a lot of JavaScript to do that. Arcade really simplifies it and kind of does all of the wiring of handling a lot of that logic for you. All right, so let's go to Arno for another aspect about time.
Yeah, so we're going to stick to time for now. Some of the additions last year was time support, also for 3D. So we added basically parity with what you were able to do in the web map. You can also now store in a web scene some of the time configuration. Additionally, this time filtering also works for scene layer. This is what you see in the bottom left with some of the buildings in Zurich, how they're kind of coming in based on the construction year, going back, I think, to the 1200, some of the old buildings in the old town. And then we're combining this also with a new time setting, which is called layer visibility. So that was added for 2D and 3D, so in the web map and in the web scene. So you can basically define certain time extents for the whole layer, whether it's shown or not. And this is useful, for example, in the upper right corner when you have integrated mesh that were captured at different points in time, showing the construction site of this sports stadium, and show to visualize the progression over time. How I think, oh, this is not looping. Maybe I can go back. Sorry about that. Yeah. See how the old stadium was demolished and then the new one is constructed. And as I already mentioned, this generally works for 2D and 3D layers, as here in this web map in the lower right corner. Additional visualization improvements are labeling. So we have, for example, in 2D maps, we have labels that follow lines, or the ability to click on the label and show a pop-up. In 3D, we improve vector labels, making sure that they orient themselves with the view. So when you change the heading of the camera, then they basically rotate with the camera. This was a highly requested feature, but we're aware that there's more labeling requested, labeling improvements in 3D requested, and this is also an area that we're still putting quite a bit of work into. For example, make sure that Labels are not occluded by 3D objects, that you can still see them. This is something that we're planned to release in the coming releases. A big topic is oriented imagery. This is also supported in 2D and 3D. I think this was added last year. But with the last releases, there were more improvements to the viewer that you see here in the samples below. So the viewer that shows the oriented imagery and, for example, also then projects this view into the 3D scene or onto the 2D map, giving you better spatial awareness of what you're actually looking at. But there's also more interactivity going into this viewer, that you can, for example, hook it up to a feature layer and visualize features of that feature layer in the oriented imagery viewer, or even create features in that viewer, as you can see here on the bottom right, where a polygon is drawn on top of a rooftop and then appears in the map. In the upper right, you see new capabilities of performing measurements, again, in the image. There, you have to be a bit specific, whether you want to measure distances on the ground or distances like vertical distances, for example, the height of something you see in the picture, or how far a point is above ground. But these are things that you can now do directly in the oriented imagery viewer. This is a 3D specific feature that we released a little while ago, and it's a bit hidden, which is why I want to switch over to a quick demo. Here, this is a scene in Frankfurt showing an integrated mesh with some water reflections. And so one of the things you can do now in any 3D scene, so not just in Scene Viewer, but any 3D scene, you can press Shift and scroll, and it will change the field of view of the camera. And this is useful, for example, when you want to provide very specific viewpoints. For example, having more content in your view. Also, for example, useful for street level points of view, but also just showing a larger extent of your 3D data. And the nice thing is that all of this is stored in slides, and basically when transitioning between these slides and the different camera settings, like the field of view, this also gets interpolated. So you can also reduce, lower the field of view and create sort of like a isometric, almost isometric view, or imitating a camera that would take pictures from very far away. Media layer, that's something that in 3D specifically is useful to bring in urban plans, drape them on the ground, and be able to draw on top of them. This is support that we added just to persist it in a 3D scene. Recently, we've been improving the way you can georeference it. So this is something that is currently only available in the SDK, but we plan to migrate that, first of all, to Scene Viewer, but also to the Map Viewer. Eventually, is that you can georeference, so you can really change the control points directly on the image. You can move the control points and also place them using tooltips with exact coordinates. And then also switch back to then aligning these control points to features in your scene, as you can see here by snapping it, for example, to these buildings that you have in the scene. All right, those were some of the visualization capabilities that we released. Let's go over to some analysis and workflows. Big topic for us is ViewShed. We released that one last year. And also want to switch over to a demo here to basically show different modes. So we have in our samples, we have two very nice ViewShed samples that show you how you can, first of all, persist different view sheds in slides. And we're making use of this here by basically iterating through the view sheds that are stored in this slide and then combining it with different layer visibilities to, for example, show the impact of these buildings here on the view from the street. The sample also shows how you can switch between just visualizing, adding the analysis to your scene, but then also interacting with it by turning on the manipulators. And here you can see how the view shed is fully interactive, so you can change like the distance or also the angles of how much the analysis covers, together also with the observer point where it's exactly located. So this sample here shows how you can manipulate that, but also store it in slides and basically iterate through them if you just want to present your analysis. There's another sample here that places a view shed, and then when you start to interact with it, it then shows in a second scene view what this view shed actually sees. So the camera in this overlay basically is placed exactly at the observer point of the view shed and updates accordingly. And again, here we're using this field of view effect that we've just saw before. Geometry operators is, I think, out since 2 releases. So this is eventually going to be a replacement for Geometry Engine. Right now, they're still both available in the SDK. A lot of it is overlap. You basically have the same operators as you had before, the same functions as you had before in the Geometry Engine. One of the big advantages if you switch is that before the Geometry Engine was downloaded as one big asset in the API. So even if you just use one of them, you downloaded the whole library of Geometry Engine operations. Now with the operators, you can pick specifically what you need and it will only download them. On top of that, you have support for curve and then a bunch of new operations. The image here in the right is a bit small, but there's, for example, different properties that you can now, or geometry operators that you can get from a polygon. So besides the centroid, which you were already able to compute before, you can, for example, compute the label position, which can be useful, for example, with polygons like the shape of Florida, where you don't want it to be at the centroid, but you want it to be in the center of the actual geometry. The Sketch widget has received a bunch of improvements. So first of all, there's more drawing tools. There's more tools to support freehand drawing of lines and polygons. But then, more importantly, also the widget itself or the component itself is now responsive. It has different scaling options, so you can adopt it to your UI and make sure that it takes the space that it needs. Also, when combined with Calcite, it integrates nicer if you, for example, place it into the navigation bar. The whole Sketch component was rewritten using Calcite, so it nicely integrates if you place it, for example, into a Calcite container with hiding the shadow in that case, the drop shadow that you have in the background. More Sketch improvements is snapping to grid. This is really useful in a map where you, for example, want to extend rectangular shapes. Is that you can show a grid. You can customize the grid or resize the grid to existing features in your scene, and then draw new features that snap to snap to this grid. In 3D, one of the big stories from basically the last 2 years went out in beta 2 years ago and has been improved also with new capabilities is the ability to upload 3D models directly through the web into a 3D object layer. So this is a type of scene layer that basically allows you to bring in your own 3D geometry through either Scene Viewer or any other custom app. Besides bringing in and visualizing this 3D data, you can also access the geometry. That has always been a big ask to directly access the geometry, for example, of 3D buildings, and either working with it in your scene or exporting it as a GLTF. Recently, we added support for georeferencing these models by adding the capability to enter coordinates directly into tooltips. Something we're working on, which we plan to release this summer, is the ability to read the georeferencing information directly from the model. So we support various model types, model formats from IFC, OBJ, FBX that automatically get converted on the server side. And in the future, we also want to read this georeferencing information from these models. Here I want to point out that we have a session tomorrow at 11 where we go into some of the details of the 3D object layer and have a bunch of examples what you can do with it. This coordinate input also not only works for 3D models, but in general for point line polygon geometries in 3D and 2D. And you can enable these tooltips programmatically or also through the sketch widget or the editor, the sketch component or editor component to basically have them available when editing. Multiple highlights. I think this is something we've heard since quite a while. To basically be able to assign different highlight colors at the same time. This is something you've always been able to set like different highlight colors just to make it fit the style or visualization that you have on your map, on your scene. You were always able to change the color, but now you can basically have multiple colors for different layers, but also, for example, when you specifically select something, you can set the color for that as well. This works in 2D and also 3D, and you see here how we're making use of that to highlight, just generally highlight selected buildings, and then, for example, combine that with a hover to show additional information or point out a specific building. All right. I think this is your slide.
Okay, can you go to my... Okay, so it's still yours. Number...
Oh, wait.
4.
How was that?
4. Okay. Man, it's hard to fit all the new stuff into one session. Luckily, there's sessions that cover basically everything that we've released in the last year. Just a quick look at some of the things that we didn't yet talk about. Actually, Arno taught me about this particular example. So this guy really loves to ski. And so he was teaching me about like slope and avalanches, like what percentage of slope you need to be worried about, like the direction of that it's facing. And so this is using the elevation data that's already part of the scene. So you can do things like filter it based on like the slope. You can see like the direction that the different what it might be facing. and see where those slopes are. It also covers elevation, so you can see like just a map of elevation, which is cool, and change the transparency, and then cover slope. So yeah, it's just a cool new sample that's available in SDK. It's not new functionality, but it's kind of bringing out in another way functionality you already had available looking through the sample. So attribute bins, has anybody learned about attribute bins yet? So this is a new technique that we released in 4.32. It's basically, it's grouping data into bins or categories based on a specific interval or range. So this is a nice little sample that shows that. So basically, through this time frame, you could look at the hurricanes based on the date range. And here you have the hurricanes grouped into months. So basically, it's a new way to perform a query and basically bin the data based on the criteria that you're interested in. Other updates here in the left-hand corner, we have several updates to web editing. One of the ones that Arno didn't cover that we didn't know if we'd have time for is basically you see these staging little things here. So basically you can see the features that you're creating. So it has like the staged features, and then when you hover over it, it shows which feature that it's going to create once you've created them. So that's a really nice update. You will see tomorrow in plenary, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but we'll be showing how you can integrate knowledge graph data and link charts into your web applications. And that's because not only do we support knowledge graph layers, but now we have some web components that allow you to point to a link chart that's part of a knowledge graph and let you display the link chart throughout different views. So this little video I made shows the different views that the layout could show. So geographic, or looking at the force directed, all the different views that you can view the link chart. So anyway, there's many new features that you can explore and see in other sessions. I wanted to recommend that everybody considers attending these 3 sessions. Some of you might have missed part 1, which is right before this session. Don't worry. If you've missed it, we'll be covering component topics throughout the week. But I would highly recommend that you attend part 2 and part 3 of this series to learn all about app development using components. The second session is about using frameworks. Many customers have come up to me asking like, oh, okay, do I have to learn frameworks, or when do I use frameworks, or what do frameworks do for me? All those questions are answered in the session and kind of with practical examples of how you use frameworks with components. So it's going to be a really great session. And then also the part 3 is about user experience. So how do you build out your UI? This is highly focused on using calcite in combination with the JavaScript components. It's presented by one of our core developers that are building the components, and he's teaming up with one of our best Instant App developers that have been using components for a while, or building components for Instant Apps actually. So that's going to be a really great session as well. So there's many great sessions this week, but these are some that if you don't make it, at least watch the recording after the conference. Okay, and with that, I would say this is the fastest we've ever had. We've done the what's new together. We're usually like cramming for time. So we have plenty of time for questions.
Is there a little handheld mic?
Oh, there's another mic.
There's some questions on the.
Do we have a third mic?
Oh, they're bringing us one.
Okay. Any questions in the audience? Yeah, in the back.
Like highlighting the roads, based on
Yes, I can actually.
Let me repeat the question for people who are in the live stream. So the question was, in the feature table, is there any support for custom styling of the rows?
So yes, so that actually is absolutely possible, and I'm going to be demonstrating it in my session on Thursday. I think it's called Raw Data to App Holistic View. Basically, Jeremy, let's see. See that? Is that kind of what you were talking about? So Jeremy is going to be doing the server side, like building up, using the WebGIS, creating everything, and then I'm going to be consuming it and building this app from scratch. And one of the things that I do is I theme it, and the feature table component has the style applied to it, but there's some more you can do. This is not the limitation of what you can do, but yeah, this is the hover calcite variable that I used, CSS variable.
We have a few questions in Pigeonhole or online. Any update on when the bulk attribute editor will be implemented?
Okay, bulk attribute editing. I believe it's going to be, we definitely hope to have that done this year. It could potentially hit in June. There's a potential that it could be the October release. So yes, it's definitely a priority that we're working on.
Sounds good. Any other questions in the audience? Yep, in the front.
Okay. With the sketch component, we added our own way to draw an arrow. Is there any plans to have natively just have the arrow option there?
Let me repeat the question. With the sketch component, is there any plans to natively add an arrow symbol?
Not currently, but because it's a component, our direction is to eventually implement slots. So that might be a way that you could, without having to use just the underlying business logic and completely redo the UI, you could, in the future, just use like the slot approach and add your own tool. But today, it's I think the approach you've taken is just fine. It'll be, continue to be supported in the future to use the underlying business logic, sketch view model in this case, to build, that kind of added experience. Yeah.
There was another comment/question in the online. It would be great if the sketch widget has the capability to do geoprocessing, like buffer on a drawn line or point. It's kind of just a comment, but yeah. It aligns with the sketch question earlier.
Thank you for the comment. Yeah, that's definitely a straightforward but custom implementation.
Any other questions in the room over there?
Specifically, plans to implement specifying a certain color for drawn shapes for the sketches.
Repeating the question, it's for the sketch widget or component. Do we have plans to update the color?
Pick any color they want and then draw a shape and have that color.
So the user can pick any color they want and draw a shape and have that color.
So our direction on that, from how I see it, is that we'll eventually have like a symbol styler. Like, you have a symbol styler and map viewer. We want that to be available and that you could apply it to a sketch. I don't think we would release that, just have like the color to be set on the sketch component on its own as a capability until we actually bring that whole experience of kind of configuring what you want the symbol to look like and then use it for the sketch experience. So that's down the road. I don't think we will have that this year. At best, it'd be next year.
Any other questions in the room? Yep.
With the display filtering, can that be configured to essentially hide the layer? And if so, is it still possible to client side on the effectively hidden layer?
With the display filter, is it possible just to hide the layer? And if so, can you still query the layer?
You can still query it. Why? What's the goal for that?
Workflow we allow for clients to search on things that aren't necessarily visible.
So I would just do a regular query for that. You don't have to mess with the display filter. You could, I think you could probably implement it that way, but to make sure you have the features that you want, like where you have full control over which features are brought down, I would just do a query on the feature layer. Yeah.
There was another question over here earlier. Anyone else?
Going. Oh yeah, I forgot
there's
to
one.
show. Is my, oh, you guys, please, I forgot to say this. Please fill out your survey. Tell us if you liked it and how great we did, or if you have we have room for improvement or something else you'd like us to cover. Definitely let us know because we read all of the surveys, every single one. So appreciate it.
I have another question from online. Are there any plans to add a core component for spatial and attribute querying?
Not that I know of. I haven't heard anything about that.
And then another question that came in earlier that maybe is on some other people's minds. Moving forward, do we have to use components to define a map or scene and widgets? Will we no longer be able to declare these elements solely using the JavaScript SDK?
So our recommendation for all new apps is to use the components. So basically you use a map component or a scene component as opposed to the map view and the scene view. So that's the recommended way to build apps. Now, that being said, you can still access the view from the component. So if you need to do something with the view, you can still get to it as needed. You can also declare your map and your scene components in JavaScript if you wanted to do it. You can create the elements, but you are working with those components as elements as opposed to taking the approach of creating a scene view explicitly in a map view.
Okay, and then this next question is for Arno. I believe it had to do with your sketch demo that you showed earlier. Can you change the coordinate entry away from metric, and can we have quadrant bearing support?
So the coordinate input just depends on the spatial reference that you have in your map or your scene. So we'll just use whatever whatever spatial reference is used.
Great, thank you. Any other questions in the audience? Yeah.
That both the calcite components and the JavaScript SDK undergo accessibility testing. Talk a little bit more about that process is like.
So we do an audit with a third-party company, and actually it's done on an ongoing basis. And they basically go and they do a wide range of testing on calcite and then separately JavaScript SDK and separately map viewer, like individual projects. They report back like all of the accessibility issues they find with kind of rated at the criticality of each one. And then we work with them to resolve it. And then we also are working to put together a accessibility report. So you can see basically how we did.
Any other questions in the room?
Okay, thanks everybody for attending, and see you more this week.
Thank you.